If you are guessing, he must be at the vet. And this must be another one of those in-the-car recordings for RPG A Day 2020. If that's what you have guessed, well, you are absolutely right. And I would say that's a pretty good deduction based on the available evidence. And if I, in this channel and the blog, were following along in the numerical order of the prompts, it would be investigate that we would be talking about. I think today. But we are instead talking about the prompt dramatic, which means that we get to talk about, let's say, two different, not competing because they can occur within the same session with the same group of people, but let's say two different forms of improvisation. So in the scene portrayed on the blog, we have a dramatic moment where the NPC character of Linda, the shift supervisor, who has been transformed into a giant mantis creature, is finally able to communicate via a kind of spiritual translation brought about as a side effect of the possession of the Diego Spencer character. Right? So she's finally able to reveal her inner thoughts. And so there's drama. A little bit more of the background is revealed in terms of motivation and character relationships. But also the characters sense that she is not long for this world. She cannot continue to survive in this way. She agrees with the position of the Ghostbusters. She no longer agrees, if she ever did really agree, with the villains. But how can she, survive in this state, if at all? And even if she physically survives, will her, her own personality and mind survive in this unnatural form? So it's quite a dramatic scene. And of course, this is an NPC character, which I created before play. This was not a character that I improvised on the fly. Right? Not suddenly in the moment did I get a flash of flash of creativity and say, you know what, I'm going to have one of the NPCs be a transformed mantis creature named Linda. That didn't happen. At some point, I created the character, but not as an act of in-the-moment, instantaneous improvisation. So what am I talking about with these two different forms of improvisation? Well, we can approach improvisation in the moment as a group, or we can narrow down the focus so that there are limits placed on who gets to improvise what. And I think this is fairly well known throughout the hobby. But what seems to be harder to talk about and leads me to speculate that it's less well known is the idea that our improvisation can be about character level ideas, decisions, things that the characters are going to do, things that the NPCs would realistically do, reactions that organizations within the world are likely to have. Like, well, if you run around downtown firing off guns, you're likely to have to deal with the police and other emergency responders, just as an example. So there are character level reactions inside the game world. What makes sense to us to decide our outcomes or to use the system to determine what the outcomes are. And there are groups that play with this being the sum total of improvisation during play. Meaning the situations, the NPCs, the agendas that that the different characters and NPCs are trying to accomplish have been established prior to play, and then play will determine how all of those things interact by how the players react just as people, what they think of to do, what the dice have to say about what they thought of to do, and etc., etc. So everything is created beforehand, and then improvisation gives it that spark of life. Well, there's another way to approach all of this, and that is not to think of it on the character level, but to instead to think of it on the dramatic level. What should happen next if this were a story, if this were a film, if this were a novel, right? If this were a campfire tale, what would be the best type of scene to happen next? What should happen next? Thinking of this on the story level. And once again, this can be subdivided between all the players at the table, or collected as a privilege or a duty in the hands of a few or just one at the table. So we can manage the beats of the story. We can manage this type of scene should be followed by that type of scene. This is this type of genre, or this type of setup, this type of story. And so therefore it should have these types of scenes in it, and I need to determine in which order they should happen, right? This is the briefing scene, and this is the view of the villain, and this is the initial setback, and this is the moment of recovery and getting your own back, and this will be followed by a minor triumph, which will be followed by a huge setback, and then there will be personal interactions. And if you think back over the course of this series of entries for RPG A Day 2020, you'll find that there are those beats. The question is, where did they come from? Were they planned out? Were they agreed on? Were they talked about as players, or thought about as a game master and implemented on the story level? Or did they arise naturally from character level responses to character level actions and reactions and situations? It's an interesting thing to think about. And we end up arguing about, or we can end up arguing about, how the outcome of play will be different, or some people might go down the road of one is better than another. It may not be that the outcomes are all that different. And it can certainly be that one is better than another for you, but it's very difficult to prove that one is just objectively better. And so this is why I want to use the words different. But everything that goes on behind the scenes, everything that you do, from how your preparation works to how much preparation there is, how you access the preparation, how everybody at the table interacts with that amount of preparation, and what they contribute or don't contribute to it, what they can suggest, how narrative points such as fate points or style points or luck points, how they get spent and on what, how far reaching the effects can be. All of these things are connected to this issue of, are we creating drama through interactions as characters, or at least on the character level? Or are we manufacturing, creating drama from story elements and playing the characters inside them? The decisions that you'll make in the way that you describe things, in the way that other players at the table describe things, the actual decisions you feel are appropriate to make, enjoy different levels of constraint based on how you actually approach envisioning how play is constructed. You can still wind up with very emotional, very dramatic scenes filled with conflict and tension and tears and laughter and vows of enmity and the burying of hatchets and all sorts of dramatic interactions. Either way you approach it. But the way that you approach it will determine what you actually have to do in order to get there. And I find this to be endlessly fascinating. Anyway, that concludes our not very brief driving video for today. And tomorrow we have more to share, but we're nearing the end of RPG A Day 2020. Today is day 21, and so there's only 10 days left. We have far more days behind us than ahead of us. And to me, it has seemed to move very fast and have quite an impact. Anyway, until tomorrow, take care.